Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military of Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. So these 3 days are very important both for the Russians and for Ukrainians. Today, on the 22nd of August of 2025, Russians celebrate the National Flag Day. So as you understand, this is a very important day when Russians honor their own flag. So this is a patriotic day first of all. And of course, this is from Russian side. When talking about Ukrainian side, we understand that this is the best opportunity for Ukrainians to attack Russia and basically to humiliate Russian Federation during this holiday. And the 24th of August, so this Sunday, is the Independence Day of Ukraine. So this is the completely opposite mirroring situation when Ukrainians are going to honor their own independence, this very important day, and Russia from their side have very good opportunity to attack Ukraine and to humiliate Ukraine during its Independence Day. But at the same time, there were chances that neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians would attack each other during these days, giving and allowing each other to celebrate these two important holidays, the Independence Day for Ukraine and the Day of Flag for the Russian Federation. And of course, due to the fact that the Russian Flag Day is the first holiday in this row, of course, everything depends on Ukraine. So that is why we were waiting whether the Ukrainians would do anything or not. And Ukrainians did. The Ukrainians during the previous 12 hours attacked the very, very important energy facility, the pipeline Druzhba. This is the pipeline we're talking about. As you can see, as a result of attack, a very huge fire appeared. This entire facility was damaged significantly. The Ukrainians managed to deal critical damage to this energy facility. And the Russians used this pipeline of Druzhba with the purpose to supply Hungary with oil, with very cheap oil. Obviously, this pipeline was stopped, this entire facility was stopped, and of course, Russians will suffer losses. But it's not just about losses, not just about pipeline by the name of Druzhba. First of all, this is the question of humiliation. Today is the Russian Flag Day, and the Ukrainians carry out this attack. So now we have no doubts that the Russians will try to counterattack Ukraine during their Independence Day. But there is one big problem with this situation. Zelensky is tricky with this situation. First of all, during every single year, he calls European partners, European allies to come to Kiev with the purpose to celebrate the Independence Day of Ukraine altogether. And as we know, Russia never attacks Ukraine when European leaders are on the territory of Ukraine. So the Russians try to avoid these days because they understand that they don't want additional escalation. And of course, Russians don't want to attack Kiev when there are foreign leaders. For example, today we got a report from Kiev that the center of Kiev will be closed tomorrow, or foreign guests are coming to the capital. This information was published yesterday by the evening of the 21st of August. So we believe that Zelensky will try to call for as many as possible Western leaders, maybe the President of France, maybe the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, maybe leaders of Poland, Italy, and many other different European countries. He will try to call them to visit Kiev during the 24th of August of 2025, and obviously this will make Russian attacks all over the entire territory of Ukraine with missiles and drones almost impossible, because if Russia attacks, it can lead to additional escalations, and we know that Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin don't want to have additional escalation of the conflict. They want to peacefully settle the conflict in Russian favor. So this is the situation. Obviously, that was a cheap strike. Ukrainians could attack this pipeline anytime, but they decided to attack this pipeline during the Russian holiday. But as we understand, currently the Russians they have possibility to counterattack Ukraine, but it seems that they will not do this. Or they will do, but then this will lead to additional escalation. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation on the ground. And first, let's talk about the Zaporizhzhia direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. During the previous 12 hours, additional progress on the ground was recorded. The armored forces of the Russian Federation continue offensive operation in the direction of the settlement of Golgovska. As we understand, according to latest updates that were provided both by pro-Ukrainian resources and by neutral mappers, the armored forces of the Russian Federation during the previous 24 hours, during the previous 12 hours, managed to outflank the settlement of Volgovska from the north and from the northwest. Before moving further, let's take a look at how the map changed during the previous days. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 18th of August of 2025, and this is exactly the moment when the Russians launched their offensive. And almost every single day from that date, we were adjusting the map in Russian favor. So now we see how exactly the Russians were moving. Now we understand that the Russians are tasked to take Olgovskaya completely, and then the Russians will move further in the northwestern direction with the purpose to dig and to cut the villages of Poltavka and Novomikhailivka, so to attack between these two villages and to split the entire territory in two. Now we're moving to the area of possible Ukrainian breakthrough. If you remember, yesterday we were talking a lot about the settlements of Andreevka, Klivtsova, Tolstoy, about counter-offensive operation of the 5th Heavy Mechanized Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine. We were trying to analyze the pictures, maps, satellite pictures to understand whether the attack that was published by the 5th Mechanized Brigade took place these days during August of 2025, or Ukrainians published old videos of July of 2025. And you know, as for the beginning of the 22nd of August of 2025, we still haven't received anything that can confirm any of this theory. The only thing we got is that pro-Ukrainian sources of Deep State adjusted their maps as well. So they colored these territories completely as a gray zone or contested area. So as I understand, currently nobody understands for sure what exactly was happening here. So that is why everybody decided to take a small pause before we get additional clarifications. So we will keep this area as a gray zone or contested area for another several days until we get additional video or probably some proof from the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation or from Ukrainian sources. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk agglomeration. Several very important changes on the ground were recorded. The Russians continue their offensive operation in the area of the settlement by the name of Udachne. According to information we have, the Russians crossed the railways that cut the settlement of Udachne for the southern and the northern parts, and the Russians began offensive in the northern parts. So which means that by the morning of the 22nd of August of 2025, the Russians answered the most decisive part of the battle for the village, and the Russians are about to finish the battle for its territory completely. But at the same time, the Ukrainians counterattack Russians in the southwestern part, and as a result of counteroffensive, according to different pro-Ukrainian and neutral mappers, the Ukrainians managed to restore control over the southwestern part. So as you can see, there are very heavy clashes for the village, but the Russians are getting further and further with the purpose to establish complete control over the territory. I would like to remind you that the main task of the armored forces of the Russian Federation is to take under control the village and then to move further in the northern direction towards the mine by the name of Pokrovsk. So this is the primary target for the armored forces of the Russian Federation that opens the way further in the northern direction towards the city of Sergeyevka and Grishina, the last two villages that Ukrainians use to supply and support their contingent on the entire Pokrovsk agglomeration. As for the northeastern flank, during the previous 24 hours, also additional changes on the ground were recorded. The Russians are getting closer and closer to the settlements of Shakhtovo and Sofievka from the southeast. So as we discussed, this is a Shakhtovo pocket, probably the most important defense belt of the armored forces of Ukraine. The Russians understand, both the Russians and the Ukrainians understand that if Ukrainians are able to slow down the Russians in this direction, most likely Russia's plans to break through Ukrainian defense to the northeast of the city of Pokrovsk will fail. So that is why the Russians will not count losses, they will not count price they pay for this pocket, because the general battle exactly is taking place in this pocket. If Russians take this pocket under complete control, and we are talking about the territory between the villages of Kucherov, Yar, Toretskaya, Sofievka, and further in the north-southeastern directions towards the village of Rusin Yar, then the Russians will be able to establish very powerful foothold between the Pokrovsk agglomeration and the Kostyantynivka agglomeration. The length and the distance of this, let's say, foothold from the southwest to the northeast would be more than 20 kilometers. And using this broad front line, the Russians would be able to attack in many directions, and Ukrainians, the most important, would be stretched from the Pokrovsk agglomeration till the Kostyantynivka agglomeration. Once again, so if Ukrainians want to keep this area under complete control, the length of the front line for them would be around, let's calculate this, if Russians take this territory under complete control, would be around 83 kilometers, and Ukrainians would be forced to concentrate units along these 83 kilometers. But when talking about the Russian side, due to the fact that they would be inside, it would be like something like a pocket during offensive operation, the length of their front line would be probably twice less. So, which is very important, at least 50 or 60 kilometers with the city. So the Russians' front line would be much shorter, and the Russians will be able to be much more flexible, mobile, because they will be able to make a decision in which direction to attack, in the direction of Pokrovsk, in the direction of Belitska, Dobropolye, or in the direction of the city of Druzhba. At the same time, the Ukrainians would be forced to keep forces on every single direction with the purpose not to allow the Russians to break through. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Kostyantynivka direction, where additional changes on the ground were also recorded. The armed forces of the Russian Federation are finishing the battle for the settlement of Lyman. Additional changes were recorded according to neutral mappers. There are very heavy clashes for the territory. The Russians continue bombing and attacking the village of Lyman and the main evacuation roads. In this video we can see another moment when the Russians discovered some communication equipment in the area of the village of Lyman, and then the Russians attacked this territory with artillery. Several explosions were recorded, so the situation for Ukrainians here remains tense. As for the southeastern part of the Kostyantynivka direction, during the previous 24 hours, additional changes were also recorded. I would like to remind you that just yesterday, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that the settlement of Alexandra Shultina was taken by the Russians. Furthermore, according to geolocations, the Russians crossed Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal and began advancing deep inside of the pocket in the direction of the city of Kostyantynivka. And by the morning of the 22nd of August, all those reports that we got yesterday were confirmed and were clarified with additional ones. According to information we have, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the dense network of the fortifications to the southeast and to the east of the city of Kostyantynivka. So all these trenches were taken by the Russians. The Russians managed to dig in deeper, and now they're concentrating themselves and regrouping before further offensive, real offensive in the southeastern part. At the same time, the Ukrainians began evacuation process from the pocket with the purpose to save soldiers and assets, some vehicles. They're trying to evacuate everything they have, also in the direction of the city of Kostyantynivka. But these lines are already under complete Russian FPV drone control, and obviously the Ukrainians suffer huge losses while trying to evacuate their units from this area. So the battle for the southern and the southeastern flanks of the city of Kostyantynivka is about to be finished, and this battle is going to be finished obviously in Russian favor. And now let's talk about the Lyman direction. The most important updates are coming from the Kremenaya forest, where the Russians most likely managed to defeat the Ukrainians completely. The Ukrainians are running away from this area. The Russians furthermore managed to cut the territory into parts, and now the Russians are handling with every single part separately. So I would like to remind you that almost every single day in this area we were also adjusting the map in Russian favor. Every day pro-Ukrainian sources of deep state were adjusting the map, giving more and more territories under complete Russian control. And by the morning of the 22nd of August, the Russians managed to create several pockets in this area. This is the first pockets between the villages of Tarskoye, Zarechnoye, Yampol and the Kremenная forest, and this is the second pocket between the villages of Dronovka, Serebryanka, Kuzmino, Dibrova. Now the Russians will let's handle with every single pocket separately. We believe that the southeastern pocket is the first one. We're talking about the pockets between Dronovka, Serebryanka, and when the Russians finish the battle for this area, they will be able to move further in the southwestern and in the southern directions. So most likely very soon we are going to see a lots of interesting and important updates. The Battle of Lyman obviously is going to take place in 2025. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds to we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.